Good morning.
Good morning, Eve.
Hi, Justin. Thank you for joining me for this podcast. And my name's Eve Berry, and I'm with Nautilus Leadership Services. And we're doing a series of podcasts on community building with folks who've been involved with it and are using the principles and practices in their work and life. So I'm here with Justin Wieland, who is the executive director of the Logan County Community Foundation in Northwest Kansas. So hello, Justin, and tell us a little about yourself and the foundation.
Well, I live in Oakley, Kansas. It's my hometown, and I moved here in January of 2021. And I started a tech consulting business sort of at the start of COVID called Reach Tech, helping small businesses and nonprofits with websites and live stream setup and technology, and found that there was a lot of need for those sorts of things in the rural parts of my hometown or my home state. And so I started doing that work here, and then a job with this community foundation opened up in the fall, and I ended up, putting my hat in the ring and was offered this job. And so the Logan County Community Foundation is one of most of the counties in Northwest Kansas have a community foundation that is structured at the county level. And this one was formed about 5 years ago, and it's sort of had two purposes. One is to sort of build a savings account or a set of resources for the community that can endure. We have what's kind of called a forever fund. And so you contribute to it every year like a savings account. It's set up in an endowment structure, meaning that we only use a portion of those resources every year for people in the community or organizations to apply for grants from the foundation. And so that's been building in the 5 years before I arrived. And foundation also just tries to help the state, county, local governments, and nonprofits and small businesses in the area work together to achieve, to solve problems. And it's a pretty neat and healthy organization that is sort of part of the community foundation movement that has been growing, across this country, I think, over the last 20 years.
That's great. Great. Well, I'm sure it's really contributing to the quality of life in the community and, a robust future. So,
yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you some questions and pick your brain a bit on community building. And that's the theme of our podcast. And how did you first learn about community building?
Very much by accident. I was, I lost my job. I had a startup at the beginning of 2020, at the beginning of pandemic, and it failed. It was a travel startup. And so I had sort of put all my eggs in that basket at the years leading up to that. And so I was unemployed at the beginning of the pandemic and trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? So I ended up starting this business that would work with small businesses and nonprofits, and had some ideas on some, some tech pieces we could build for it. And my minister in Oakley, Kansas, Dan Hutton, was like, I described some of the stuff I was working on and asking his feedback. And he said, you need to read Scott Peck. And so I didn't know who that was. And so I did, and I had a bunch of long drives as I was kind of moving in the process of figuring out I was going to move from California back to Kansas. And so I got The Road Less Traveled on audiobook. And I also and I loved it. It really sort of struck home in terms of, just speech. And then The Different Drum. And both of those I consumed in audiobook, and it is Scott Peck that reads his own work. And so I got a sense of why he was probably so, a reason that he was probably so popular in the 80s and the 90s when the movement was really growing, just because of his speaking style and his method of connecting with people. because it worked for me. And so at the end of the different drum, this woman comes on and she's like, if you'd like to know more about community building, contact the Foundation for Community Encouragement. It gives a phone number and an address, because it was written before there was even internet or email addresses. And so I was like, wonder if they still exist. And they did. And so I reached out and, I talked to, I think your friend Michael.
Michael Schmidt, yep.
And, just learned about what the organization does. And then because it was pandemic times, there were some, he's like, well, we're doing some of these community building workshops. We're experimenting with trying them online. We've never done that. And so then I got an invite in the spring of 2021, or like January, to one of these online workshops. And I thought, okay, I'll try it. I got to find out what's going on in this world. And that's how it happened. Totally by accident.
Yeah. So you've been involved in a relatively short time compared to some of us have been doing this for 30 plus years. So I'm really fascinated to see your perspective, and also the fact that you have just participated in an online community building, not an in-person one. So,
right.
So during that period, you attended some of the weekend events. Is that right?
Yeah, I went to one full-length weekend workshop, which is like Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And I've only done one of those.
Only one. That's what I thought. And then subsequent to that, I understand you've been involved in a ongoing group.
The end of that particular workshop, that weekend workshop, some people said, we were interested in trying an ongoing group that when people that had participated in that weekend workshop could try and join if they wanted to. And so they did that, and I participated, and that group has continued, and I think it's been together for now a year, meeting once a week, and just having like a 2-hour meeting once a week on Sunday evenings.
And the meeting uses the same guidelines as community building weekend?
It largely uses them. The group had when it started, there was a sentiment that we wanted to experiment with the structure, because it's online and it's also ongoing. So it's different than the sort of classic rules and guidelines that guide a community building workshop, at least in the framework that the foundation and like the Scott Peck sort of structure established over the years. And so the group has sort of experimented with rules, but it's largely the same as what an in-person workshop would entail. And they try to follow the guidelines. There's an effort to follow the guidelines of these workshops.
And how do you, given the fact that you have been a part of one of the weekend events, the intensive 2-3 day event, and then now this ongoing group, how do you see the differences, if any?
Well, in the weekend group, everyone was strangers when we started, right? And so then, and there's sort of, the process involves people sharing things and people getting annoyed with each other and people trying to work through a period of chaos and, just like trying to come to a sense of community. And so you try and see if you can get to that in a 2-day intensive. And some people really get into sharing, like, there's a question that's come up in our group, like, what's the difference between group therapy and community building? And in the weekend workshop, and even in the ongoing group, in some ways, there seems to be a lot of overlap, that it's a lot of people like working through emotional difficulties and psychological difficulties that they're having in the world, or in their world. But by doing that, then you sort of develop deeper connections with other people and a deeper understanding of other people's life experiences, because they're willing to share the things that are not normally discussed in the course of daily life with people that you're not intimately close to. And so anyway, in the weekend workshop, there were more people. It was a little more difficult to get airtime. And what I'm finding in the ongoing group is that because we've kind of gotten through, the group kind of knows each other. This like use of silence, like just sort of waiting until something strikes you that you want to share with the group. There seems to be more space because the group is a little bit smaller. And even though it's only 2 hours, people aren't just trying to get things off their chest because the group knows each other. So it's a similar, but there's a little bit of a different pace because you don't feel like, I think that in the weekend groups, sometimes people just, they want to get in, they need to get something off of their chest. And and in a 2-day event, there's only so much time.
Right. And I've often said that in those kinds of events, particularly when the group is in that chaos phase, it feels like people are talking or waiting to talk. And there's not the same kind of deep listening that happens once the group has entered into a greater sense of safety and vulnerability, and people feel free to speak what's really going on with them.
Right. So. Yeah, and it reminds me, my father-in-law passed away a few years back and was a Quaker, and we went to a service. I didn't know anything about Quakers, never been to a Quaker service, but there's a lot of similar sort of structure to the way a Quaker meeting will ensue and the way a community building event happens, because there's not really a leader. You're supposed to give a lot of time for silence, and you speak when something really moves you. Well, we went to this service up in Ukiah, California, and it was really well attended, a few hundred people there probably, and they tried to have a Quaker service, and the family was super annoyed because everybody in the building stood up and told the story, and there was like 10 seconds of silence in between each thing, right? It was share, stop, share, stop. And then we went to Sidwell Friends, which is it's a school in DC where liberal presidents send their children, and he taught there for decades. And there, it's a Quaker school, and they had a service there, and it was an actual Quaker service, and it was like mostly silent. And it was interesting how it was a really meaningful, that was a really meaningful service. And I think the family really appreciated it because everybody that was there was steeped in the structure of how you're trying to do this event. But, you can't really fault somebody that's not been in that world for not knowing how to make it work. They weren't really there for a Quaker meeting. They were there to tell their cool story about their friend that passed away. So in the ongoing group, you've got sort of this shared understanding and buy-in to the way that you want to communicate. And in an intensive where you're just bringing people in that haven't been part of it, like me, when I'd never been part of something like that, then those people may or may not be able to communicate in that exact accepted way, which is kind of fine.
Well, and it also, people learn during the course of the time together how to do that more. And so usually the group shifts from that, what you described as the first service, where people are just talking and jumping in, to a more reflective, thoughtful, the second service, which is kind of how it is when people really sink into the community building. So, and as you know from reading the books, that Scotty was very influenced by Quaker meeting, and had actually left his private school up Exeter Academy to go to Friends School in New York City. So that really was a big influence on his development of the community building model. So, and I just wanted to comment on one other thing you said, that about the therapy, the interesting, the group therapy versus community building. And I've often I've often heard it said that community building is not therapy, but it is therapeutic. And so there is a kind of, you were talking about people getting things off their chest, and by creating an environment where people feel comfortable enough to be real and to say what's on their mind and heart and not feel like they're being judged is very therapeutic, because a lot of times in life that doesn't happen. We're kind of guarding ourselves, thinking, well, I'm not sure I can say what I really think. Or so, as you know, the principle of being inclusive is really an important part of the community building, and avoiding exclusivity, which is basically another way of saying judging other people. So,
right.
Yeah. So, I know you've stayed involved as part of this ongoing group for the last year or so. And what do you see the benefits of community building now that you've been involved with it for a while and have a greater understanding it after that first?
Well, the benefits for me are like really learning other perspectives on the world, and on life experiences. You have such a limited view of the way the world is through your own eyes and your own life experience. I find that in the group that I've been involved with, people that they live in different parts of the world. They have completely different experiences and different religious views or non-religious views, and they have good reasons for the way that they view the world. And I find that it's helpful to listen and try and understand perspectives that you don't have direct experience with. And sort of broaden my horizon in that regard. And for me, it's also just improved my ability to listen. As I always find when I go into a meeting, there might have been something that's happened during the week I'd be interested in talking about. But after 7 or 8 people share, the thing that is sort of meaningful, or the thing that I end up talking about, if I do talk, is completely different than because of what other people discussed. And so, and that's definitely a learned skill for me. White male, say what you think, just put it out there. We're taught this. I definitely think that I talk too much impulsively in a way. So,
well, I'm not so sure about that. So it sounds like you're saying that just by getting that exposure, being willing to listen and take in what others are saying, it actually stimulates and changes something in you that you wouldn't have expected if you would just come in with your rehearsed point of view.
Right. Well, and I in terms of using it practically, I got involved in the group about a year before I ended up, not quite a year before I ended up taking a job with a community foundation that has a board of directors. And, in the nonprofit world, a board of directors is, for ours is 11 people. That's a giant board. In the for-profit world, you want small boards so that they can act decisively, and you've got a couple of experts and you talk to them for feedback and then you go do things. Well, that's not how a nonprofit board works. But it's also the board of this foundation is, I don't know if it was intentional because the board was created before I arrived, but you've got people from the different towns in our county. You've got people in different careers and with different backgrounds, people that work in the school, people that work with the city council, people that are running small businesses. And so it's really important when trying to help the organization figure out what our priorities are to listen to the perspectives of that board of directors, because they are plugged into the community, which is, we're 2,000 people in this county, maybe. It's not that big. So we actually with a group of 12, I think have a decent understanding of the needs of the community. And you want to be sure that you are making an active effort to listen to all of those voices in the process of making decisions and setting a vision, and make sure people feel included and are included, so that you make decisions that are in the best interests of the collective.
One of the things that often is stated about community building is that it's a process that lets people transcend their differences. That does not mean obliterate their differences. It does mean that it's okay to have those differences, that kind of diversity you were talking about in the communities, and use those differences to create something larger, rather than having them be barriers and a source of conflict. And as you know, so often it's hard for groups to get past the conflict. So, but with that listening that you're talking about, and the willingness to hear other points of view, which is what you talked about even earlier, it actually is a very creative process for dialogue and coming to consensus. So I can see really how you're bringing it into your organization.
I'm trying.
Yeah. It's not the same as sitting in the circle, though, is it?
Right. Well, I mean, like, yeah, this organization, this board, it's not like we've gone through a community building workshop, and I doubt that's something that will ever happen. But that doesn't mean that we can't. In a way, we are an actual community, right? Of people trying to do things together, right? And so that's one of the differences, you know, in our group. In my ongoing group, there was a meeting some months ago where it was just a really meaningful hour with the group, and some people shared some things that helped bring the group together. And there was a comment by one person in the group that was like, well, it's kind of sad that we just know each other virtually, and we're never going to like build a bridge together. That doesn't seem like, because of the geographic expanse of the group being in Australia and Canada and the US, that we're never going to get together and do a thing together. But in my organization I'm in, we're doing things all the time, right? And so I feel like, well, if you can use techniques and learnings from a group where you're practicing these techniques, you can actually use those to build a bridge with somebody that you are in a community with. So,
well, as you may recall, in the different drums, Scotty talks about the principle of community first, task second. And so if you develop that sense of community, that sense of connectedness, that ability to communicate in authentic ways first, it makes the task so much easier than trying to navigate through agendas and preconceived notions and people grandstanding and all the things that typically go on in meetings. So by doing that, you really have a chance to bring things to fruition. So that really benefit the real community, which is, you know, how cool is that you're, you know, the head of a community foundation. I love it. So yeah, I think it's building. One of the things you do in the workshops and you do in the ongoing groups is you're really building trust with each other. Trust that you can share something intimate. And then if you're able to be that open with somebody, well, then you can also probably trust them to work together, right? And so I think that's one of the things, you know, I'd like to see in this community, is just building a trust among people that, you know, the city administrators have certain objectives and perspectives, and the county commissioners have certain perspectives and objectives, and the school administration and the hospital, you know, everybody has things that they're working on
my observation is everybody really is trying to work in the best interests of the community, but the perception in the public can often be different because of a particular incident that's happened or experience, and so I think you kind of always have to be working to build trust.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that you're talking about too is the people in community building, people sharing things that are intimate or personal or whatever, and that's certainly one part of it. But I'm sure you've seen from your experiences that it's that plus it's also people learning how to deal with each other, with the people in the room, the people in the circle, not just, oh gee, I've had this thing on my mind, I'm really suffering with this loss or whatever, which is the personal piece from outside. But in many ways, it's a greater risk, to be honest, with the people you have to interact with every day and week by week by week, and kind of show up the next morning after a difficult time and continue to have a relationship. So that's the thing that you're doing with your board is, they're learning, it sounds like, how to get better with their own board relationships.
Right. I think so, for sure.
Yeah. So, how do you see community building as being relevant for these times that we're living in? We're living in some pretty unprecedented times.
Well,
so
interesting, like in the different drum, one of the things that Peck talks about is the arms race, right? About how and talking about Russia, and it's really interesting how it's the exact same. It was 30 years later, right? And here we are. There's a conflict. Now we're not in a Cold War with Russia. We're in a hot war with Russia. Or well, they're in a sort of a hot post-Civil War, and we are a proxy for it, that they're going to fight using our weapons. And we're right back into the possibility of completely destroying ourselves because nobody is willing to get rid of nuclear weapons. Like, nuclear weapons are the dumbest thing ever. Why we still have them is beyond me. Like, we're never going to use them. No one's ever going to use them. But we aren't willing to just get rid of them because we don't want to feel vulnerable.
So would you see the current circumstances as being a form of chaos in the world, to use the community building term?
Yeah, maybe. Well, and the other thing that, like, there's also such a lack of, not just globally, but like this country, our divisions are so strong.
Yes.
And there's such a lack of trust between people over political views. And, that's a thing that I think the community building movement tries to get beyond. Is I can have an intimate relationship and a working relationship and a productive relationship with somebody that doesn't share my political beliefs. That's a fact, I believe, because that's what you have to do. Like in a small town like this, we're in a very red part of the country, but it's not all red. And the people here, I find do set their political views aside to be able to make progress on community level, right? And so that can be expanded, and it can be you can use that model to make progress. I think in a small town like this, though, it may be easier because I can't just live in my stovepipe of my social media bubble of the people that are in my liberal bubble or my conservative bubble. And that's what can happen, I think, in larger cities. Or even, you know, I was just out back visiting some friends in San Diego, and we're talking about how, like, well, I have a community there, like a very strong group of friends. But my friend Candace was like, it's true, but we're not really a community. We're a group of people that are friendly, very friendly with each other and have very meaningful relationships. But there isn't a sense of community because the city's too big. So you just are in this group of people that all have the same beliefs, right? Well, in a small town, there's only so many people, and they don't all share the same views, but they all do have to work together. So there's some benefit to, you know, being almost forced to hang out with and work with people that don't share your political ideology. And that's completely fine. But it doesn't seem like it's fine right now. We place a moral judgment on somebody who has a different political view, different background.
Well, you said something really important a minute ago, which was put aside the point of view, and certainly that's something community building teaches people, is how do you put aside things that are barriers to communication? How do you release those? How do you let them go? How do you empty them? There's different words we use with it, but you're really talking about doing that in a community setting where there are some profound differences and divides, and not letting those continue to be a barrier to progress. So that's pretty powerful stuff. So anything else you'd like to add about the process, the impact that it's had on your life or your community, or anything else as we start to wrap this up?
Well, for me, it's like I'm still just trying to learn. I feel like I'm still just trying to learn what the movement is and how you can apply it in the world. And I guess one of the things I've observed that my experience with it that might be different from other people in like the groups we've been in is some people, I feel like, I remember at the beginning of the workshop, there was some comments that full weekend workshop, like people that had been to workshops before, they didn't feel like the workshop got them into community, and that what they were looking for, that like almost that like spiritual experience of being in an intimate, like getting to community in a weekend, and they wanted it because they wanted the feeling, right? They wanted the feeling of belonging in a way. It's kind of my sense was. And in my life, you know, I was in the Air Force for a number of years, and I went to the Air Force Academy, and I always have found that everywhere I've lived, if I look back on my experience, that I've always kind of been in some sort of a community. I've always had that sense of belonging wherever, you know, and there's a thing that there's discussion of this, I think, in the Different Drum, where he talks about people that have been in World War II, that they're really involved in their local VFW or American Legion because they're longing for the connection that you had in an intense experience. And so I felt like I had that in graduate school. Anything that intense that I went through, you make really good friends, and you get into situations where you share very personal details of your life with people, and you become very close to them, and then those friendships endure. And I've had that all my life. And so I'm not looking to like go to these meetings because I'm looking for that experience. I'm sort of seeking, how can you help people that aren't in an intense military basic training develop meaningful relationships where you can get beyond the fact that you hold different views on some things, and work and be able to work together and be able to enjoy working together. So
I was thinking about this the other day, the very thing you're talking about, the difference between that people kind of grasping after that peak experience, like, when are we going to get to community? And then others who, like you're saying, it's like, oh, I'm kind of along for the ride here, the process and what I learned. And I was thinking about it. And I said, it's kind of like the difference between being in love and loving.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, when you're in love with somebody, it's like this whole magical thing. And then as time goes on and one starts to notice that, yes, the toothpaste cap is off again, and all these little annoyances that, you learn how to transcend those things and love
Mm-hmm.
and accept and be together, and it just warts and all, if you will, and that's kind of what happens with, I think, in these ongoing groups, or when you've done this work a long time, is that, I don't have to be in love anymore. I can just learn to love. So.
Right. Well, and and with somebody that really annoys you, right? Can you do it? That's when you really get to the difficult part of being a loving person, is
right.
That people that annoy you, people, like, can you love your enemies? Does it have, maybe it doesn't have to be an enemy, but can you really listen and try and empathize and understand somebody that you just disagree with and that bothers you? Because their voice does matter, and maybe you bother them just as much with your, you're just trying to understand everybody or something. I'm sure that can be annoying in and of itself, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Person's self-righteous.
Well, it sounds like you're very far along on your journey into community and making it, a part of your life and your work. And I really appreciate your taking the time to share your journey and your ideas and your insights. So,
well, thanks. Good luck with the podcast and trying to share the learnings of your life experience as well. I think that people will listen and learn, I hope.
Yeah. Well, I think you might know this, but my book is just about to be published. It should be published in the next couple of months. Having done this work for 30 plus years now. And I don't know if I've told you this, but I call it Building True Community, 30 years down the road less traveled. So
yeah.
So we just want to get the word out there about it and people's diverse experiences and how they're bringing it into their lives. So that's the whole purpose of the podcast and the book, really, as well. So
cool. Well, congratulations. It's a really exciting time.
Thank you. Okay. See you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.